Theseus and the Minotaur by Ruth Fauberr. The story of Theseus and the Minotaur is one of romance and peril, a story of a courageous hero. It begins around 1400 BCE in the city of Troezen, Greece. Aegus, king of Athens, was invited to a feast hosted by the overlord of Troezen. While there, he fell in love with the overlord's lovely daughter, Aethra, and she became pregnant. Before Aegus returned to Athens, he hid a sword and a pair of sandals underneath a large rock and ordered Aethra to bring her first son to this rock and tell him to lift it. The son must then take the items and travel to Athens to meet his father. Many years later, Aethra brought a strong young man named Theseus to that same rock. He lifted the rock with ease, and Aethra revealed to him the name of his father. Theseus had never known who his father was. He had been raised by his grandfather, Theseus. Not much later, Aethra's handsome son set off for Athens by land, even though his family pleaded him to travel by ship. After 8 long days, he finally reached Athens and was invited to a feast in honor of the king. Medea, the woman living with Aegus at the time, learned of Theseus' arrival and intention to take the throne, but she didn't tell King Aegus. Medea devised a plan to poison the king at the feast and allow the sons of Pallas to take the throne, but she didn't know that Theseus was invited to the very same party. At the party, Medea put the poison in Aegus' cup just as the meat was brought out. Theseus drew his sword in an attempt to cut the meat, but the instant the king saw Aegus recognized the sword. Aegus dropped the poisoned cup and hugged his son. When the sons of Pallas realized that they had been replaced, they were outraged. They started a war against the king in protest, but when Theseus came to fight, they retreated and the war was quickly ended. It was now the year for Athens to send a payment of 7 young men and virgins to King Minos in exchange for 9 years of peace. This treachery came about because of a son of Minos who had been killed in Attica, and the only way the Athenians could obtain peace was to send the youth to King Minos. The youth were doomed to wander about a labyrinth on the island of Knossos for the rest of their lives unless they were eaten by the horrendous beast living at the heart of the maze. As described by Plutarch, it was, quote, a mingled form where 2 strange shapes combined and a different nature, man and bull, were joined. This beast was called the Minotaur, and was almost always the death of the 7 young men and virgins. As it came for the lots to be drawn for the youth, the people of Athens became upset that the king Aegus' sons were not put into the lot. When Theseus heard this, perhaps because he wanted glory, suggested that he be directly placed onto the ship without any lots drawn. The Athenians were surprised at this, but Theseus wasn't kidding. Before Aegus' brave son boarded the ship, he pleaded his father for a white flag to signal a safe and successful journey. Aegus agreed, and soon the ship was on its way to the island of Knossos. When they arrived, Theseus was greeted by the beautiful daughter of Minos, who, after quickly falling in love with him, gave Theseus a sword and a ball of thread attached to a nail at the entrance of the labyrinth. Theseus gladly accepted these gifts, and soon he and the other youth were wandering around the maze. Our brave hero soon discovered the massive beast, and after a fierce battle, the Minotaur would never eat a child again. There are several different versions of what happened next. In one, the ship stopped on the island of Naxos on the way back. Theseus, perhaps overcome with pride, dumped his lover Eridann on the island and sailed away. It is said that Eridann was depressed over a loss that she hung herself. In another, Ariadne was heavy with the child and seasick. So Theseus allowed her to stay on the island and promised to return. She was cared for by the women of the island, but she died in childbirth before Theseus could return. When Theseus returned to get his lover and discovered the bad news, he offered a large sum of money to the women and offered them to make a sacrifice. In one final variation, the travelers spent the night on the island, and in the middle of the night Theseus left Ariadne. The woman of Naxos cared for her and even made fake love letters from Theseus. The god Dionysus also came to comfort her. In each version, when Theseus returned to Athens, he was so distracted with his victory that he forgot to raise the white flag. When Aegeus saw that his son was never to be seen again, grief overwhelmed him, and he jumped off the edge of a cliff towards a rock and into the sea. Theseus held a proper funeral, and after grieving, took up work in his father's place. Today, many of today's fairy tales and princess stories are based off the story of Theseus and the Minotaur. Theseus is a courageous hero who conquers his poor background. The story of Theseus presents the love, danger, and courageous hero portrayed in most Greek myths, but it also adds the idea that heroes can come from nothing and become great, yet still make human mistakes. In Theseus' case, he was born to unmarried parents, but he used unnatural bravery and humbleness when he signed himself up to meet the Minotaur. When he returned home victorious without his lover, he possibly harmed his reputation and upset the god Dionysus. Despite his mistakes, Theseus' story entertained the Greeks for centuries and continued to entertain us with its danger and romance, brave hero and ferocious monster. I hope you have enjoyed this short documentary just as the Greeks enjoyed it. Thank you.